a world of mystery. A world so dark that you can barely see. A world where the macabre becomes a reality, and your reality becomes the strange and unusual. This is an October edition of the Cain Stevens Paranormal Super Show.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Cain Stevens Super Show. I'm your super host once again, Cain Stevens, and if you haven't figured it out by now, you're on my super show. So I have another awesome guest on my hands. We have been lining them up left and right. This is season 2. Guess what, everybody? If you've listened by now, you know that I like to talk about ghosts all the time because I find it fascinating, and you should too. So my next guest, he grew up in North Wales. He is currently in Canada, I believe.
Yes.
And well, let's just bring him on right now. We have Ben Stimpson, everybody. Ben, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you? Nice to see you again.
Doing fantastic. And our first brush with each other was on another podcast. We were both guests, and that was honestly pretty cool having a little round table of ghost talk, right?
Yeah, it was fun. It's you don't get that, especially with those podcasting groups. You never see other like it was a weird situation, but I really enjoyed it. It was nice seeing you there.
It
Uh,
was. I liked you so much. I thought to myself, I wish we had more time, and now we do. We're here on my show to talk more. So
I show up for anybody. It's all good.
well, let's talk about some of this stuff. So you've grown up around the
Yeah.
paranormal most of your life. You grew up in an area that obviously is littered with history
Yeah.
and the paranormal in general and ghost stories being told forever. Let's start with what are some of the old myths or ghost stories from North Wales that you can remember as a kid?
Yeah, for sure. So I just want to kind of set the scene for people in North America, particularly. So where I was in North Wales is it's the same mountain chain as Appalachia, as further up into Nova Scotia, as the Highlands of Scotland. So that whole area was once all together about 1 billion years ago, right? So it's a very similar landscape, different fauna and flora, but very similar landscape, rolling hills, deep valleys, and then you get into the mountains, and it's just like deep mountain passes, and not quite so humid as Appalachia, but quite cool, right? So you've got these little tiny villages all over the place. Many of them were Welsh speaking well up until like 50 years ago. Many of them still are, but you have this really interesting mix of culture. So you've got the English infused culture coming in, you've got Welsh culture, so you've got this interesting mix of legends. And that whole area has been the route to Ireland for 800 years. So English forces would have moved through this area. The Romans were there. There were quite a few Roman sites in the area. Where I grew up, there was a Roman road not too far away. And so it's been a migratory space for centuries. And so some of the ghost stories I grew up with, they were both Welsh and English. Close by to where I grew up, there was a little town called Tremercian, and there was a ruined tower there. And one of the kind of the oldest stories there is that it was a wizard's tower, and the devil had helped him create it. And on certain stormy nights, people would report seeing lights inside the tower, like a general kind of miasma coming from that place. And of course, being like a mountainous region, the whole area was filled with mist and would often get very misty very quickly, very foggy very quickly. So as a lot of the stories going through are speaking about travelers traveling that area. Very not a populated space, and so you get a lot of stories of ghosts in the mists and things like that. There's a lot of fairy tales too. There's a lot of stories of giants being in the land of King Arthur. Basically, some of the oldest Arthurian tales are set in North Wales in that mountainous area. So yeah, I grew up with a lot of things. Some of the cooler ones are the ones that I experienced myself. So I grew up literally in a pub. My parents were publicans back home, and the little place that they had, it was originally a stagecoach inn, about 400 years, 500 years, and it was the kind of an inn that stagecoaches going to Ireland would stop off People would, they would change horses, they would get some food, and then they would carry on their journey. So parts of it were about 500 years old. And I remember as a little, like, I think we were there from like 1986 to 1992. So I was about 5 or 6, and I would go downstairs, and like it was just pitch black at night, especially after they closed up, and they wouldn't open until about 2 p.m. the next day. So the mornings it was completely empty, nobody in there, nothing going on. I remember going down, and I would occasionally meet people downstairs. And of course, me, 5, 6 years old, being in a drinking establishment like that, you'd see people all the time coming in and out, right? These people weren't supposed to be there. These people actually weren't there. They were always dressed in very strange clothing. And I mean, as strange as English clothing can be, right? Because I mean, out in the country, they wear some weird things back then. But I came to realize that they were not actually there with me, and that they were either images of people, or they were like reflections of people, right?
Right.
They In 1992, we moved down the road to a little cottage that my parents had bought, and were like flipping in order to raise some funds for Canada. And that part of that place was about 400 years old. It was like a very old crofter's cottage. They completely renewed it, and there was all sorts of weird things that would go on there. Whether it be like little men who would come out of the verge and come and speak to me, and then go back into it, or we had we had a long kind of area where it was just windows. They had just extended on, and it was just a long, long extension. And every so often you would see like somebody running past the window, as if like you'd think, oh, who's there? But they would only run past one window. So there was a line of windows. You just suddenly see it go like that, and it wouldn't appear in the other windows. So it was like, and after a while, my parents were just like, it becomes so normalized when you live in a haunted place like that. But I mean, I had a hag attack a couple of times. Experienced I called her the dark woman who came into my bedroom, and the weirdest thing with that is on certain mornings, my older sister, was 13 years older than me, would come in, wake me up, and she said that sometimes she came in and my eyes were open. I was sleeping with my eyes open. So yeah, weird things like that. Yeah. I don't know. I have so much to say. I don't even know where I should go with this. Come on, Kane, help me. I don't know what to
Right. This is one of those things where it's like, where do I begin?
do.
You have so much stuff. Let's talk about seeing some of these apparitions and these things show.
Yeah.
When you were a child, obviously a lot of people say that children and animals are more open to seeing stuff like that. So maybe
Yeah.
they were kind of showing you. Were you terrified at that time, or did you feel a certain amount of comfort? What were they like? I guess when they appeared to you.
Yeah, for a lot of times it was just so normal. The only times I would be very afraid was when I had the hag attack, when I encountered that. I used to call her the dark woman. And she would come into my bedroom, and at the time I was like on a bunk bed, but there was no bottom bunk, so I was on a raised bed, and I would just I would suddenly I would feel like I was going into shock. You know, when you go into shock, and it's just like you feel the blood rush, and you suddenly go clammy, and you just like you can hear your heartbeat in your ears. I would
Yeah.
start to feel that, and then suddenly I would see a shadow come into my room and come around the bed and was looking at me. She had these big long fingers,
Oh wow.
and like at the time I was like, I mean, obviously I didn't know what was happening. I just thought that this was what, that this was somebody or something. I didn't know what she was. Um, but but then I would just daze out, and I would wake up the next morning, and that was it. But it happened about 3 or 4 times, and that I can remember. It may have happened a lot more than that. I just can't remember. But those are the only terrifying pieces. All the other encounters I had, it was just so normalized, like they were just part of the landscape. And
Right.
every so often, like you would see in certain parts of the house, you might look through a window, and you might see almost like a reflection looking in, but it wouldn't be your own reflection. But it wouldn't be like somebody stood on the other side. It was a reflection. That was a very common one, and after a while, you just didn't look through the windows. Um,
Well,
yeah, sorry,
a,
go on.
a lot of it is kind of it is more peaceful than we think. It's
Hmm.
not, you know, it's not the woman in black is the stuff of horror movies. I mean, stuff
Yes.
of complete terror. And I'm going to
Yeah.
come back to that in a moment because you know, I've had
Yeah.
a few similar things in my life,
Hmm.
especially with sleep paralysis, but also
Mm. Hmm.
also as a kid having vivid things happen while I was sleeping. But the
Yeah.
interesting about it is like when you're in a place like these, a lot of times it's just shocking, right? It defies
Hmm.
logic. It's like, why is this voice appearing out of nowhere? Why are these things
Yeah.
banging around me? But then I wonder to myself, like, what is the spirit world really like? Like why are they doing these mundane things? Are they trying to get our attention? Are they just
Hmm.
doing it and we just happen to be in their space? What do you think on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly don't fear it anymore. I've had a lot more experience, practical experience, hands-on experience with spirits since becoming a practitioner myself. I work with spirits regularly. I think that people, if you're not used to it or you're just experiencing it without understanding what it is, there's a difference between, say, a psychic reflection or a psychic imprint, where it's like just picking up an old movie and watching a movie, right? What you're seeing and experiencing isn't sentient. It's not there. It's you're just picking up on something. So, I've had experiences like that where it was just like, oh, it's a it's a hologram. Look at this, right? I think the sentient ones are the ones that kind of become a lot more fun and become a lot more freaky. Um, yeah, I think that it really depends on what you're actually interacting with. Um, the spiritual traditions I work with, there are rules and there are guidelines and there are other spirits that will step in if something becomes a bit disorderly. Because of my own work with those spirits, I don't tend to be bothered anymore. But I think that people freak out when they don't understand or that they don't have control over something. When you're a kid, you don't have any sense of what control means. There is no such thing as a control because you're just, in the world, right? So I think that people are a lot more open when they're children. Um, and then as you get older and you start to get, depressed and you start to, have anxiety and imposter syndrome and all those other pieces around control issues, you start to freak out more because then you're like, I don't have control here, right? So,
Well, do you think some people don't put much stock into sleep, right? Sleep paralysis and all that. They just tell you
mhm,
it's a natural occurrence. It's this and
mhm,
that. But I don't know. I mean, I've had some pretty sinister things.
mhm,
I mean, I'm a person who has regular night terrors. I'm a
mhm,
person who, as a kid, I can remember having like it'd always be in my grandparents' house, like it'd be like
mhm,
in the
mhm.
Ozarks part of the United States.
Oh
And
yeah.
it would be like a tall, kind of like what you would see on movies. It was all black. It was always a black
Mhm.
figure. It was a horned figure, kind of had like goat type
Mm.
horns, and it moved very slowly throughout the house, but it terrified me
Oh,
as a kid.
wow.
And then as I got older, I would have this sleep paralysis, and it would be like I would be present in what I was doing. I would know what was
Hmm.
going on, but I would have a figure come into my room
Hmm.
and I would scream aloud and nobody would come. And the only thing that'd make it go away, to be honest with you, was just prayer. And
I
I,
see. Yeah.
and so I would pray and it would go away. But I mean, it would
Hmm.
take me places. Sometimes when I was dreaming, it would take me to what I can only describe as a hieroglyph type of a pyramid type thing. And when I presented that to certain investigators and people looking for answers, they tried to tell me that I was abducted by aliens, which I honestly I dismissed as malarkey. And granted,
Yeah.
I do hear a lot of things from people, but I don't think that's what happened. I think there's something else
Mm.
going on there. Do you experience this type of thing? And if you do, what do you think it is?
This is the thing. There's so many layers to it. I think that it is, there's this theory that I kind of ascribe to, which is the holographic universe theory. And it's this idea that there are as infinite number of slices of reality as there are, you know, in a hologram, right? So when it comes to spirits and whatnot, people will say, "Oh, well, we don't believe in that because, we believe in these spirits. We don't, we can't believe in those spirits because we believe in these spirits." I think that there's a multiplicity to it, right? I think that there are as many as many realities that are intersecting our own as there are infinite. So to me, I do think that, even if it's not a physical issue, it could very well be a mental journey. You could very well have been taken somewhere on a mental level, because on the mental level you're connected in with that sense of reality. I think that, we get so used to looking at the scientific rationalism of it all, of, only being able to see or experience reality through our five senses and through our ability to record things. But I think that, again, there are so many unexplained things, and our technology only takes us so far. So I do believe, absolutely, I do believe. Now, whether or not those are aliens, or whether those are other forms of spiritual beings, or even if aliens are spiritual beings in some way, I think there's opportunity for it all. But I think experience tells us things. That being said, I do think that people can conflate. I've certainly experienced this myself, where the mind will play tricks on you. The mind fills in gaps because your rational thinking is it takes over and tries to make sense of the unsensible. And so what I've learned is really feel the experience, go into my gut and feel the experience. And in doing that, not rationalizing things away, I've learned a lot about my how I think. So yeah, I think that it's an open field, I think. Yeah. I
Well,
hope
what?
that wasn't too wishy-washy.
No, that wasn't wishy. I mean,
Hmm.
one could make a case that it's all wishy-washy when they listen to the show, but that's okay. I don't care. I like to put myself out there. I don't mind the tinfoil hat comments and all that stuff. It really doesn't bother me at all. Let's talk about you as a practitioner. Yeah, you
Yeah.
practice certain things and you have clients. What exactly are you a practitioner of, and what are you doing with these clients?
Yeah, for sure. Well, my clients of my psychotherapy work is very separate from what I do in my spiritual work. As a spiritual practitioner, I'm working actively with magic. I'm working actively with kind of spiritual work, so relationship with spirits, whether it be through ritual work, whether it be through magic, whether it be through prayer, whether it be through even just story. Story is a great avenue into some of these other dimensions. And I think the more the story is shared, the more it takes form, the more it comes through clearly. I also practice psychic mediumship, and I've had quite a few experiences with that. So yeah, my client work is a little separate from my spiritual work. In the spiritual traditions I've had experience with Santeria, Lakumi, which is African spiritual tradition, Spiritismo, which is spiritism, not spiritualism, spiritism, which is the French kind of sister of spiritualism, and that's seances, working with spirits directly. And a lot of it's through meditation. I do active dream work, which is a big part of my work too. I also, again, coming back to that feeling piece, I work a lot with time and space and fate, and it's a felt experience. So it's not so much a rationalism piece. But I also work, from a psychotherapeutic place, hypnotism, and I'm very interested in the way that the mind works, because if I know how my mind works, then I can differentiate between what is just generated from my mind coming up with, trying to fill in the blanks, versus what is actually experienced around us. So I practice meditation, I practice mindfulness and whatnot, in order to just separate those out and become a clearer picture for myself of, okay, yeah, okay, I'm hearing this. Is it just me because I need to have coffee and I'm too sleepy right now?
Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
And are you a warlock? I gotta ask. Are you?
Am
Do
I a
you
wolf?
practice?
I'm not Scottish, no.
Dang it! I thought
No.
I caught you in the act. You know what I mean? He's well, yes, I am.
Yeah. Well, I do practice magic. I do practice magic because, I mean, what is magic other than working with reality to shape it to your will, right? It's the same way that any other practice is. And that's one of the reasons why originally things like astrology, things like magic, things were like even prayer, right, was seen as a science, because you were using the unknown hidden aspects of reality to do things, right?
Right.
Prayer is the same thing. What are you doing? You've got a situation in front of you. You're appealing to a spiritual being of some kind, to help you, right? So that's magic in a way. Yeah.
would you say that you're pagan? What do you take on paganistic beliefs, and do you believe that you're working in the occult?
Oh yeah, totally. I wouldn't, I wouldn't say I'm pagan anymore. It's something I used to say I was, but I find it very limiting because paganism can be very kind of anti Christianity in many ways. And yeah, I'm like, well, Christianity's been around for 2,000 years. It's a very strong ancestral religion from my own ancestors. And the culture, like, if you look at a lot of folk charms and the folk beliefs and the folk practices, particularly with laying spirits, for example, a lot of it is appealing to this very big figure in the room, which is Christian God, right? So, that's a groove. That's more of a groove, getting into a groove of practice, of cultural power, of tradition. Tradition is really powerful in that way. And I think that's because that's often, in my experience, that's often spirits will spirits will manifest in a way that makes sense to us because our rational minds are trying to make sense of them. And our rational minds are cultured, right? So a lot of the spiritual traditions are also cultural lenses that we see them through. And so, they're not going to just appear as whatever, because then we won't understand them. When you look at fairies, for example, a lot of the stories around fairies match the stories of UFOs. You don't really talk about aliens 400 years ago. You talk about fairies. Now we talk about aliens and abductions and like strange lights in the sky and little green men and whatnot, right? And I
Right.
think there's a cultured narrative that has formed, particularly around aliens, that experiences are kind of shifted into, like funneled into. And so we now would see, oh, well, little green men, they're aliens, they're not fairies. It was 300 years ago, 200 years ago, they're fairies, right?
Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about fairies and giants and
Yeah.
dragons and all that stuff. Guess what, everybody? I think that we've been talking about it throughout history. I think that it's all real.
Hmm.
I don't think that it's a bunch of, for lack of a better term, fairy tales, right?
Hmm.
But I think that it's more than that because I mean they even talk about it in our scriptures in biblical texts.
Totally.
They talk
Hmm.
about, instead of dinosaurs, for many years before, before what, the modern century, they're calling
Hmm.
dinosaurs dragons, right?
Yeah,
So dragons,
that's the thing.
yeah,
Yeah. you know yeah, I think again it's I think that it depends on how we're looking at it, right? Is it on a real level, or is there some sort of a spiritual element there? What is the difference between a dragon in the flesh versus a dragon that just appears in the flesh for a little bit because it can come into our reality for a little bit, right?
right.
But I do think that there's a lot of unexplained things in the world. There's a lot of spaces in the world that we just don't know. I was telling you about the YouTube channel I've been like obsessing over this past week, which is Wartime Stories, and they did a little special on the Giant of Kandahar. Have you ever heard of this story?
I have. It's fascinating.
Ah, yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah,
Let's talk
right.
about it for a second. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the Giant of Kandahar, there is an urban legend that kind of came out and evolved since the since the Afghan War. So 2002, I think it was. And there was a recon unit sent up into the hills around, like in Kandahar province or Kabul, somewhere in Afghanistan. I'd have to rewatch it. And they go missing. So a second recon team is sent in, and these three guys are going through, looking, searching, and they suddenly come across a some of their units remains. They go for a little bit further on, and they come to a cave, and the cave is strewn with bones outside and some like destroyed U.S. military equipment. So they're like, shit, was that? And then suddenly this giant, like 12-foot giant comes running out with a giant spear, and he's got red hair, big red beard, and he doesn't look like a local. And he just impales one of these Marines. And so they start shooting at it, and they kill it. Fortunately, the Marine who was speared it was killed too. And then the US government comes in, takes the body, and flies away. It says all of them need to sign non-disclosure agreements, and that's it. And then the story evolved, and the story has evolved over the past 20 years. It seems like a lot of people especially evangelicals, are talking about it as, oh, this is proof of like the Nephilim, and this is proof of these giants from biblical texts and whatnot. And yet, when you look at it, there's some interesting evidence. Like the in that whole region, there are an ancient tribe of people, red hair, and I can't think. I think they were Ossetians um, or Turagians or something like that. But they were there like 3,000 years ago. Red hair, Caucasian looking, like their mummies are all obviously from Caucasian lands, and people are like, what are they doing here? Because this is the middle of Asia, like there's no other groups that look like that here. So it's an interesting kind of thing. People are bringing in all these little snippets and kind of building a story. But it's interesting. What could be in those cave systems up in the middle of Asia that we just don't know, right? And
Absolutely.
that's a long time thing too. Like that's been a story for the past few thousand years. What's just over the hill, right?
Well, even here in North America, right? There has been talk for many years on in a lot of
Hmm.
different civilizations here in North America about giants being, Native
Hmm.
American giants ruling,
Yeah.
even down into South America when you're talking about like the Mayans and the Aztecs and all, you're taught
Hmm.
they're still talking about giants being amongst them. What if they were
Yeah.
gods to these people? What if the Nephilim were these gods of these, and they
Mm.
just kind of like ruled everything. I mean, it's hard to tell because we don't see them, but the
Mm.
Kandahar one is pretty outrageous.
Yeah, it's a very recent modern story, but when you look at the story, it has so many similarities to stories from England 300 years ago, Turkey 400 years ago, United States, 150 years ago, right? Stories of Paul Bunyan, for example, right? Now, in that case, we know that he's become bigger because he's become more folkloric, right? But even that story of, going through the wilderness, he's got his, moose bull, I think, is it? No, blue cow. And he's just planting things all over, or Johnny Appleseed, same thing, you know. I think there's one way to look at it, which is, society will make their legends big because they are either threatening or they are, their status, or there is something else going on here. There's so many stories in Europe especially in Northern Europe, of giants creating the landscape. And it's very easy when you're in a landscape like that. It's very easy to imagine, oh yeah, that huge, massive glacial boulder over there is there, middle of nowhere, because a giantess came and it fell out of her apron, right? Very easy to believe that.
Well, and you look at the NBA here, and I mean, Shaquille O'Neal's a prime example. I'm convinced
Yeah.
this guy is a modern giant of some
Hmm.
sort. I mean, he just everywhere this guy walks. Andre the Giant, they some of these guys have like
Hmm.
the pituitary issues or whatever, where they just keep growing
Hmm.
and growing, right? And so that's kind of
Hmm.
something. But I don't think that the giants that they were seeing from then were all this Andre the Giant type thing. I think they were just
No.
absolute giants.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. And again, you find these stories all over the place, even in, cross-culturally, and they all bear very similar sort of like features that couldn't possibly exist otherwise, right? So it makes you wonder. And that's, I mean, maybe that's why I'm like so obsessed with it lately, urban legends, because my whole background has been old folklore from medieval and early modern. And now I'm looking at these urban legends, and it's like, yeah, this is just the next iteration of these stories again and again. I don't know if it's something cultural that just perennially is manifested, or if it's that stories take on shape and become real because so many people are focused on them, you know.
Right.
This idea of fake lore, for example, right? Stories that are created. Look at Slenderman, for example. Really good example of this, right? We know that Slenderman was created 8 years ago. We know it. We know the person who wrote it, but through the internet, it just evolved and evolved. And now people are seeing it. In a lot of the pagan communities and the occult spaces I work with, the idea here is that a spirit has come along and has seen that there's an emerging shape for them to take, and they take it and they become that, right? And I think that when we look around like ancient, world religions, oftentimes the same thing happens. We have this idea of genius loci, this idea of spirit of place, and with animism, this idea that spirits will just take on the forms that they either need to or can take on as they go along, and then they become that, right? We see a lot of these ancient deities start out as very localized, regional, deity of this mountain. Zeus suddenly becomes a world, a whole god of the whole universe, right?
Yeah.
If we look at Christianity, though, I mean, look at the God of Abraham. We have a deity, perhaps one way of looking at it. Don't come at me. I'm not a Christian, so I'm not committing blasphemy here. But this idea that you have a very localized spirit that manifests as burning bush suddenly becomes bigger and bigger and bigger the more followers that he gains. And suddenly he's become this huge big deity with reach all over the world, right? That's one way of looking at it. I know that's not a Christian way of looking at it, but it is one way of looking at it, right?
Well, there's nothing wrong with how you worded that. I mean,
I'm very careful.
Yeah, I love a good British accent of any type anyway. So I always tell everybody that the British just do it better anyway. Like acting, I could listen to you talk all day about it. Unfortunately, we have to take a pause here and get to some. It's not unfortunate for you guys out there, but it's just unfortunate because we want to keep getting to it with Ben here. So when we come back, we'll be back with Ben Stimpson right after we run these wonderful commercials that we drew up and then talk about a few local sponsors, and we'll get back to it. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, get ready to rumble with the Ultimate Beard Care Showdown. Introducing our headliner, the one, the only, Squatch.
Oh yeah, Mean Jim. Squatch in the house, and I'm here to tell you about beard products that'll make your whiskers the talk of the town. If your beard's ready to take on the world, you need the power of our beard balms, butters, and oils, brother.
That's right, Squatch. Let's kick things off with the Beard Balm of Legends.
This beard balm is like a body slam for your beard. It tackles those wild hairs and smooths them out, making your beard look like $1,000,000. No sweat, brother.
What's the scoop with the beard butter?
Oh, brother, it's a game changer. This butter makes your beard softer than a cloud and as easy to manage as a well-oiled wrestling machine. Plus, it's got a scent that's as sweet as victory. Oh, yeah.
And let's not forget the beard oil.
The beard oil is the final knockout punch. It hydrates, shines, and smells like a championship belt made of cedar and pine. Your beard will be the 1, 2, 3 of any match.
Where can our fans score these unbeatable products?
You read my mind, brother. Head on over to elegantsasquatchco.etsy.com and grab your beard gear. And listen up. Use the code SUPERSHOW and get a jaw-dropping 20% off. That's right, 20% off. Your beard's about to go from 0 to hero, brother.
That's elegantsasquatchco.etsy.com and use your code SUPERSHOW for 20%. Don't wait, make your beard the ultimate champ today. Ahoy, mateys! Christopher Columbus here. You know me. I discovered America, or at least that's what the history books have been saying for years. Anyways, I have a little confession to make. My compass quit halfway through the trip, and I got lost at sea on the way there.
Ahoy, Captain. What direction should we point the boat?
Shut up, you fool. I'm in the middle of a commercial here. Anyways, what was I saying? Oh, yes. When we arrived on land there, the natives were all decked out in their cool Viking gear. They said these big, smelly, bearded guys came, hung out, then split with all their cool stuff.
Hi, it was a weird day.
That could have been our cool stuff. We could have claimed all this great treasure and all this pirate's plunder.
But, sir, how will we steer the boat if we don't have a compass?
Well, this next trip is going to be different. I'm heading to Slying Tattoo to get a compass on my hand. After that, everything is coming up Christopher Columbus.
Ahoy, sir. That new ink looks great on you. After I swaps the poop deck and grease the hootenannies, I think we're going to be back to spin and... Oh, no.
What is it now, you buffoon?
It appears as if America's shores are just on the horizon.
What? How could this be? I've been pointing my arm in the same direction for days. Well, looks like this tattoo compass is broken too. Guess I'll have to head back to Sly Ink for that dolphin lower back tattoo I've been wanting to get. Well, looks like our native friends are waving us in, but oh, wait, they don't look very happy. Well, until next time, friends, if there is one.
All right, everybody. I hope you guys didn't fast forward through those ads. If you did, shame on you. I keep promising you I'm going to put like a massive like blow up projector in your garage area, and I'm going to make sure you have to watch them anyway. So you might as well just watch them. Stop fast forwarding through them. All right. We also have some local sponsors on our hands. Thank you guys for sponsoring me. So let's talk to them right now. We have Roots Music Shop here in Lincoln, Nebraska. For all you musicians like myself, it's the only place to go. You can buy, you can sell, you can trade. You can tell Ryan that Cain sent you, and I promise he won't burn you at the stake and turn you away. Go to Roots Music Shop for all those sweet deals. Get yourself a guitar right now. Also, we have Gray's Keg, everybody. Gray's Keg is amazing. It's a dive bar by day, which I love. I like a dive bar by day and night, but it's also a music venue by night. So go there. It's just off the beaten path. It's right past downtown, all your favorite haunts in downtown Lincoln. Just go a little bit further and you're going to love it. So go to Gray's Keg, everybody. And then we have Tam O'Shanter's. Tam O'Shanter's has been around forever. Tam O'Shanter's is a staple here in town, and they have some of the best lunch and dinner specials in town. So go to Tam O'Shanter's. Now let's get back to it with my guest, Ben Stimpson. Ben, welcome back.
Hello, thank you. Sounds like an amazing place, Tamashantos. Looking forward to trying that out when I'm in town.
It is. It's fascinating, man. I would love to get you here in Lincoln, man. I could show you all sorts of crazy places. We could go to Wilderness Park. Yeah. We could go to where there's an area that people call the Hell's Gate there.
Oh, wow, okay.
Where supposedly a witch was, this is where all the bad things always happen, right? Supposedly a witch killed some kids. Here we go. And then I think they hung the witch or burned the witch or something. And the folklore goes from there. And this is just local folk. There's a lot of things here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Have you been to the United States, and have you been to the center of the United States here in Nebraska before?
Never been to Nebraska, no, but my mum had a half brother who lived in Chicago and grew up in Chicago after the war. Literally, he was one of those like wartime babies, and he was shipped off with his mum to the United States. And so I've been around the Great Lakes area, but never been into the center though. There's so many places in the States I want to check out, but Nebraska is on my list too now.
It's fascinating. It really is. Nebraska has an interesting history. You love history like I do. I can already tell. And maybe even more, to be honest. And I love history, but I mean, we have the plains. There's a lot of terrible things that happen here. I mean, obviously the Native Americans were drawn out of their lands here. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. The city that I'm living in, Lincoln, Nebraska, I would say there are people that I've watched them say that Lincoln is one of the most haunted cities in the country. It's like a sleeper place, right? Like nobody really talks about it, but it really is. Like there are a lot of hauntings in the city. So I don't know. You should come here, man. We'll tear the place up. We'll find.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah, it's the area that I grew up in Ontario here. So it's a place that it's called Grey Bruce County. When you look at the map, it's like the little peninsula that juts into Lake Huron, and that is like traditionally called the Queen's Bush. And it was one of the last areas in southern Ontario to really be settled. It's only been settled for like 150 years. A lot of German settlers came up into the center, a lot of Scots-Irish on the coastline, right? And the whole area was a border zone between different Native American tribes, right? You had the Algonquin, you had the Iroquois further up, and then the Haudenosaunee and the Confederacy just below. So this whole region has been a place of bloodshed for like thousands of years because it was literally the border between those two. So the landscape was really saturated with conflict, and then because it was just heavily wooded, then suddenly it was all cleared, and all the little places around have a really vivid ghostly history. So it's interesting. Yeah. And I mean, land soaks that up, right? I really noticed that place really soaks that up. like I said, with Genius Loci, it kind of takes on that identity, right?
Well, how far are you from Oak Island? I mean, you're aware of the Oak Island.
Completely opposite end of the country.
No, I gotta
It would
ask.
take me about, yeah, go on.
No, I gotta ask every Canadian, right? I have to ask you guys: Are they ever gonna find anything there? Or are they just gonna continue pulling up clay and wood and calling it something?
I don't think they'll find anything there, to be honest. But it's funny because there are so many other places around the Maritimes that have stories like that.
Yeah.
The recent no, not recent Assassin's Creed, one of the Assassin's Creed that was based in North America. They made jokes of that where it was like finding a Viking longsword or finding a Viking horde, right? There's a lot of unwritten history in the region of the Maritimes, particularly. And then further in, of course, you get all the stories of like smugglers and the French explorers and French voyageurs, and like trying to find like lost hordes of their treasure. Of course, they were trading in pelts and things like that. So I doubt very much 100 years later you'll find any of that left over. But you never know with Oak Island. It would take me about 25 hours to drive to Oak Island from where I am. I'm in like just near Toronto, so yeah, it's people don't realize how big Ontario is. It takes like 24 hours to drive from one end to the other if you're really gunning it.
Well, and it's baffling how us Americans have no idea where anything is in Canada. And you're just
It's okay. We don't know where anything is down there either,
fair enough, man. Well, let's something that we mentioned when you and I were talking, that you had mentioned something about having interactions with like
Mm,
spirit possessions and things of that nature. So
yeah.
that obviously pinged in my that's a terrifying thing for many people. But let's
Mhm.
talk about your interactions with these and what you think they are.
Yeah, for sure. So spirit possessions are things that are worldwide. Every culture has spirit possession, every single one of them. When you really look at it, they all have stories of spirit possession. There's something there about unseen forces coming into the body or coming through the body. And in many ways, like psychic mediums now speaking for the dead is a watered down version of what originally would have been spirit possession. Now, in the Christian West, obviously, the idea is that they're all demons or they're all evil, they need to be cast out and exorcised. That's not a recurring thing around the world. Sorry, I'm burping here. Something's coming out. So so with the traditions I've been very lucky to be part of, many of them being African based and Caribbean based and like South American based. So Spiritismo and Lukumi particularly, very related to voodoo in a way. Very similar sort of worldview, very similar apparatus. Haitian voodoo was partly derived from Lukumi, from Santeria. And then in Brazil, where Spiritism is such a big thing, a lot of those have taken up African traditions. And the idea is that the tradition is built in a way that will work with specific spirits in order to allow those spirits to come through to particular members, usually initiated. The process of initiation prepares you for that process of becoming a mount, of becoming somebody who can accept a spirit. And it's a very similar process in many different cultures around the world. A lot of South Asian and Southeast Asian traditions have spirit possession in this way, and there are eerily similar rites and rituals that will prepare you for this, right? So the idea is that you're working with particular groups of spirits. There are code words, there are safeguards put into place. Those spirits are often keeping away other negative spirits, and so they're generally seen as safe. They're generally seen as familial. Some of them, especially with Haitian voodoo, for example, they're often ancestors too. They were practitioners who became kind of bigger and are now returning into the bodies of their descendants or in bodies of their community. And they're basically coming through to work with that community, whether it be to give guidance, whether it be to help protect that community, whether it be to I don't know, just hang out. A lot of these events are just for those spirits to come down. You just hang out with the spirits and you have a wonderful time. You have a feast, you dance, and then they go away, and then you've had a great, a great village gathering, right?
Right.
So there's those. Then there's the more general of random spirits coming in and just taking over the vulnerable. And this is what we often see with kind of exorcisms, right? So somebody is suddenly becomes ill, and then suddenly they have a demon inside of them, or they have a spirit inside of them. They need to be exorcised out. So my experience has been mostly with the traditions as opposed to exorcisms. But I've seen some really interesting things through my time, and I was only really just touching into it. There's certainly things that as somebody who wasn't a fully initiated, I wouldn't have been able to see. I was not allowed to see or experience. It would be too much for me, and so generally this again safeguards put into place. But I remember seeing I was part of a séance and several seances actually, but this is the first time I ever saw it. And there was a woman there present who had practiced. She's of South American, I think she's from Chile, Chilean background. And so she's practiced being a medium in that way. She's practiced being a vessel in that way. And her spirit guide came into her body. And it was almost like, when you see somebody and they look like somebody who you know, but they're actually not.
Yeah.
And you can tell they're not acting. They're just different people. Um, she was a different person. Her whole mannerisms changed. She wasn't acting, and she started speaking in Spanish. And she was telling, somebody else there, one of the, a message from their ancestors, and she was becoming riled up. She was getting very hot. This is another thing too, when you see the whole Linda Blair in the bed, like right? It's like uh, having spirit inside your body is hot. It's a very taxing experience, and so she needed to be cooled down. She was drinking guzzling water in order to stay in there, and then the spirit lifted. And she came back and she was exhausted, but she's done this before. It was just an accepted thing. There were other spirits that had come into that space too. Now, that being said, again, the tradition is set up in a way that only those who are allowed can come in. The spirit guides are set up there so that they're acting as bouncers. They won't allow just random spirits to come in and jump somebody. And you've built relationship. She's built relationship with that guide, with that spirit. And so it's happened before for her. She knows, and the spirit knows how much she can handle. And then afterwards, she has aftercare. We usually have a meal afterwards in order to, get our electrolytes back up. So, but some of the things that were coming through, like, and this is kind of anecdotally, in the Lukumi tradition, working with Orishas, these are spirits of land. They're great spirits, like voodoo spirits. One of the reasons that a lot of people have faith in these is they'll go to an event, in California, and they'll have a spirit come down, have never met the person before, except they've interacted with that spirit before, and the spirit will recognize them and will say, I told you this the last time I saw you. Have you done it yet? Oh, no. Oh, well, you need to do it, So it's, there's a lot of anecdotes around that. Yeah, what else do you want to know? I don't know.
I don't know. I would be, I would be. This is like the only thing that truly terrifies me is this type of stuff.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, if I was anywhere near this lady, I mean, I would be throwing holy water. I'd have crosses all around me. I'd have my hand. I'd be ready to at least try to. I'd be terrified. I don't. How do you keep from being scared in these situations?
Well, again, I think it comes down to that idea of faith, right? Like Espiritismo is very Catholic based. That's just how that evolved. So we start by singing the Lord's Prayer beforehand. We start by having holy water there on hand to cleanse ourselves. So it's very Catholic based. And the spirits that are coming through, some of them were humans at one point, and they were Catholics at one point. So they respond very well to those Catholic hymns. Others, like one of mine, is Jewish, but she just goes with it, right? So, but I think the fear there is it's very shocking when you see something happening in the moment. But once it becomes normalized for you, you realize what's actually happening. So you see people going like shuddering, and they start going into like you can tell something's going on. When you're in that space, you become hyper aware because of that fear, and in that hyper awareness, you begin to perceive things. So with what happens a lot is you almost see like something go like cross over the face, and that's that turning point. You're also in an expected zone, right? So you're in a space where that's expected. If it was happening on the streets, I think that would be very different. And I've experienced that. One of the cities I was living before, when I was practicing these things, it's kind of like Pittsburgh. It's a place called Hamilton, Ontario. It's an old steel city just south of Toronto. People made their millions like 70 years ago, and then the steel mills ended. And so you have a lot of poverty. There's a lot of people with mental health issues who've moved down because they don't have anywhere else to go. They're living in assisted living, and so you have people with mental health issues roaming around, and a lot of drug addiction. There's a lot of issues going on. And you can tell when somebody is having an episode from a spiritual lens and from a psychotherapeutic lens. I can see, okay, this is just a symptom of a mental health issue, versus, okay, something bigger is going on here. They've just been jumped by something, and this thing is having an issue. My godfather, who I was working with, had to go to one of the hospitals once. And this particular hospital used to be a psych ward like 50 years ago. Now it's just a general hospital. But he said he would go in, and he was there. It was like 2 a.m. in the morning. He was with his husband at the time. And he saw all of these ghosts, and they were all orderlies, like they were nurses from like called midwife era, right? They were dressed up like nuns, right? And they didn't have any faces, but they were going around tending to these random ghosts that were floating around. And he said he saw this young guy come in. He must have been like early 20s or something like that. He was having a mental health crisis. And he said he knew that something else was going on in that. There was something else in him, because the guy suddenly stopped what he was doing, turned directly to look at him, and gave a huge grin, like, I know who you are.
Oh my
I know
God.
who you are. And my godfather was like, because these traditions are based on like godfathers and the initiated priests, was just like, no, you don't come close to me. I don't want to deal with you right now.
Yeah.
And then the guy continued on. So I think there's a lot of pieces to it. Yeah.
Well, a lot of the skeptics out there would say that all of this stuff is just a symptom of mental health issues, right? A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people want to pin things they don't understand on the negative, or just say that it's instantly,
Mm-hmm.
like they would look at me and go, you're interested in ghosts. Well, you're just interested in ghosts because, like I had a heart event of some significance, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so you're just, but I've always been upset. I've always been more curious. I'm not gonna go out there and say that I'm like a higher intelligence, but my
Mm.
mind is always working, right? And you're
Yeah.
you're an intelligent guy. But let me ask
Well,
you,
I hope so.
I think so. Well, if at the very least you have a great accent, and it makes me
Thank you.
believe no matter what. But this is the thing. Do you think, what percentage, if you had to, and I know that's a tough question to answer, what percentage would you say of people who have paranormal experiences are just dealing with a mental health crisis of some sort?
It's a it's a difficult thing to answer. And again, I don't want to be wishy-washy, but I think it depends on what it is, right? What I find very interesting are people who talk about near-death experiences, for example. Now, near-death experiences, from a science point of view, they can claim that it was an issue of the brain. It was an issue of like, a little chemical imbalance here. It was it was the trauma, the brain trying to sort through this trauma, right? And yet at the same time, there's all these unexplained ability to perceive things in another room that was happening while they were on the operating table, right? I think that extrasensory, we can look at it from the data, or we can look at it from the impact on that person. If somebody is having a mental health issue, if somebody's dealing with schizophrenia and having delusional hallucinations, that is going to be a consistent thing for them. They're not just going to have one event or two events of that. It's going to be a regular thing, and it will be affected by their the pills that they're taking, right? So, if their pill cocktail is off by a little bit, that's going to be measurable. versus people who don't have a history of that suddenly experiencing something. Well, of course, the regular question is, okay, what stresses were happening in your life? What was environmental factors? What's your history with, seeing things or hearing things, right? And if there's no history of that, then it's very difficult to just explain away as, oh, it's a mental health issue, right? This is where for me, I really like to know, okay, for mindfulness, okay, what part of this is really pareidolia, for example, right? If I'm seeing faces in the trees or whatnot, how much of that is pareidolia versus something else? And that's where I got the gut feeling, right? So it's a very subjective thing to answer. I wouldn't even try. But I think there's a lot of factors that we can include that could say, okay, this is a hallucinated breakdown. This is not. I think that at least in Canada here, the psychotherapy and psychology institutions are starting to clue into this. What is the difference between a hallucination versus a genuine spiritual experience? And one of my friends down in one of his Toronto hospital networks, he runs the department that is training psychotherapists on what is the difference there? Because we can't just ignore when somebody has experienced something or believes they've experienced something. We can't ignore that if they want to work with it, right? And from like for my clients, for example, I work with a lot of pagans in a psychotherapeutic way with pagans and other spiritual types who have experiences with entities, with gods, with deities, with demons, with spirits, whatever you want to say. So then as a psychotherapist, I'm very interested, well, what's your relationship and how is that impacting your life, right? So I go, I operate just as any other type of relationship we might have.
Well, it was kind of a loaded question, with really no one could give a substantial answer. But I just wanted to kind of know, because you work with people in these type of things, what
Mhm.
you might think on the subject of. I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to get into this briefly.
Mhm.
I go to a lot of paranormal sites, especially. I know social media is a cesspool, but it's still fun to go.
Yes.
And so in this cesspool, there's like Facebook, for example, there are
Mhm.
paranormal groups where all they do is post pictures all day long. And so these people, I wonder if they're completely mad or if there's something. They'll post a picture, and to me it's total pareidolia, right?
Mhm.
And you're
Yeah.
looking at it, I don't see anything. Like there's literally nothing there. Maybe it's like a bush is in the back, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, do you see that child?" And I'm like, no, but I don't want to be rude either, right? Like I don't want to crush their spirit. But then I go to the ugly, nasty comment section, and it's just everybody roasting these people. It's pretty terrifying.
Yes.
It's terrifying for them. They
Yeah.
truly believe it, but a lot of it really is, right. A lot of it is
Mhm.
just your mind trying to connect the dots, is it not?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of it is people wanting to believe, and so they're creating opportunity for them to believe, right? It's Mulder and Scully running around, right? Where I think that it comes really important to is when you're seeing all of these things, eventually, like I guess maybe it's a very human-centric way of looking at it, but I do think that there's logic to all of this. So when you have multiple accounts of the same thing from different places, I'm looking for the commonalities. And so on these groups, eventually you'll start to see commonalities, which will say, okay, this is a legitimate experience
Yeah.
versus this isn't a legitimate experience. And, I think a lot of the spiritual traditions I've been part of, that's the benefit of having practitioners going back 200, 300 years in a lineage line is they've had those experiences, they have those anecdotes, they have that relationship, they know what is real and what isn't real. And so with what we find on a lot of pagan groups is, oh, this deity has come in my dreams and they've told me this and they've appeared like this and all of this and all the other, right? And that deity happens to be from a tradition that has a 300, 400-year-old lineage, that deity has never appeared like that before. Now, who are you going to believe? the mass of experiences from the priests and the practitioners who have, had relationship with the spirit, even if it's just in their head, right? Or the one person who says, no, they appeared in a dream and they look like this, that's when it starts to become like process of elimination. That might be then them filling in the gaps or their own projections or mental health issue, right?
I try to approach everybody the same way. It's with, I do paranormal investigation. People tell me all sorts of crazy things, and I don't mean crazy in a negative way. I just like to the regular public, they would say that's pretty crazy. But they do. I try to take people with a grain of salt. I try to listen to what they're saying, and I try to have some faith in people that they're not trying to lie to me on purpose. I'm sure there are people who, for whatever reason, they want to believe so bad that they want to make it up. But the majority of people, right? If you have a collective of people and they're all saying, yes, I believe in hauntings, I had this happen, I would say this. Well, I say this all the time in the show. If you put 100 people in a room and they've all been in a haunted house, they all believe that they have. But I'll bet there's a high majority of them that are actually telling the truth, that truly believe that this happened. They don't have any malicious intent or anything involved, right? So you got to take people for what they're saying and have a little faith in humanity, don't you?
Oh, totally. Well, and I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that people lie. I think I see this particularly in my therapy work. People will build and develop a story that self-soothes or self-serves them in some way, right? And oftentimes some of these stories are self-serving and self-soothing. They're not even conscious of it, though. It's a very subconscious meta-narrative that's forming. And we see this with memory studies. That's why I'm really interested in memory studies and like seeing how do memories form, and this idea of like the false memory syndrome issue, right, from a few years ago.
Right.
I think that when we get into that, then that's a brain process issue, and then and that has how can I say this? When put to scrutiny, those tend to fall apart very easily versus an actual lived experience. There's a trifecta of components that really make a memory reliable. Usually there's a place, usually there's a story, and usually there's a sensory experience or something like that. When you have those three, that's usually the memory will be planted in different parts of the brain and will anchor, right? So this is why it triggers, right? So when somebody has developed a narrative that's self-serving and it isn't real, usually it will fall apart under scrutiny. But for other people, the memory will just keep coming back again once one of those triggers, whether it be they're in a place, whether they have smelled something, or whether they like see the image in their head, right? The brain is a really interesting dynamic thing, but there's there's ways of figuring that out, right? But a lot of people aren't out there to try and lie. I think the people who are actively trying to lie, you'll see the holes in the story go very quickly, and then it'll be like, okay, yeah, no, they're just telling us for attention, or they're just trying to get something out of this, right? Yeah.
Well, I wish we had more time to talk.
I know.
This is fantastic.
This is so good. We should do it again.
We should. Let's do a part 2 for sure. I'm saying it right now. But right now, I know that you're an author. I know that you've got a lot of things going on. Please tell people how they can get a hold of you if they want to subscribe to your services. Any of this stuff, do that right now.
Yeah, for sure. So benstimpson.com is where I've got all of my stuff. I've got a podcast with other spiritual writers and authors, psychics, mediums, pagans, whoever you want. I've got a book out, and I've got one in development, currently looking for a new home. And yeah, I've got classes on there. I've got information. So benstimpson.com.
All right, well, visit benstimpson.com, everybody, and thank you so much for being on the show. It's been an honor. I wish Fred the Skeleton had more to say today, but he's a little bit quiet, so he has a bit to say.
I shocked him.
You did. Well, thank you for your time, and for those of you guys listening on the show, tune in next week for another amazing guest as we dive into the human experience, and we try to figure out what the hell it is we're doing here on this crazy planet. So we will see you again next week, or we'll see you again on the other side, everybody. Goodbye.